Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, now in its 50th season. I'm your host, Tony Sertich. We're back in the studio for our second show this spring, and we are practicing physical distancing to keep our guests and crew safe. It's been a busy few weeks at the state capitol, with some of the major omnibus bills that set state spending making their way through the House. This is your chance to ask questions to the lawmakers who represent you. Call the number on the screen or email questions to ask@wdse.org. And we have great guests to answer those questions today. First up, Representative Jen Schultz is a DFLer from Duluth, representing House District 7A. Welcome, Representative Schultz.
Thank you.
And Representative Dale Lueck is a Republican from Aiken, representing House District 10B. Welcome, Representative Lueck. Great to have you both here.
Thank you.
Representative Lueck, we're going to start with you. We've been off the air for a couple of weeks. There was the Easter Passover break. And a question that I get all the time from folks is, why do you guys wait till the end? There's about a month left of the legislative session. Why do you guys wait till the end to make all your big decisions?
Well, it's very similar to filing your taxes every year. You have to wait till you get all the data in, and so there's a process there. We get a couple of projections. The governor provides his budget. Then we get that second projection. Then we go back and relook at that. At the same time, the House is looking at their proposals plus the Senate. So it's a linear thing. And so if we start doing stuff the first week of January and make a lot of decisions, budget forecast, we haven't even seen the governor's proposal. So we really waste a lot of effort. So it's linear. That's the problem. We need all the data before we jump in and make those final decisions.
Yep, and we hear that whether Democrats or Republicans are in charge. Representative Schultz, you're chairing the Human Services Committee, and you're going to be in charge of one of those omnibus or big bills. And so can you talk a bit about the process that goes into that?
Sure. It's one of the larger bills. Health and Human Services, it's about 30% of our general fund budget, so it's second only to education. So we had a lot of bills being heard. We took a lot of testimony, even in a Zoom environment. And we tried to prioritize. We waited for our budget target, and actually this is the best Health and Human Services omnibus bill I've been involved with, either in the minority or majority, because we have a very solid budget target of about $340 million over the base funding. So we were able to spend a significant amount on areas where we need to address areas like homelessness. So getting money for communities to address homelessness, money for mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, money for our workers who work as PCAs or personal care attendants. There's a shortage and they're underpaid, so we're putting a significant amount there to increase their wages. But really it's very broad. We looked at child protection and trying to help counties, trying to keep children out of foster care. So that with the new federal money coming down, which we didn't spend in the budget, we're going to see a very healthy investment across the state in health and human services.
Great, thank you. And as a reminder to the folks at home, please call or email in any questions that you have for your legislators today. We're going to keep track and stay in the House because we have two House members here today, the People's Body, and my favorite of the two bodies, of course. One of the major spending bills that was talked about this last week on the floor was the transportation bill. I'm assuming one supported, one voted in opposition of that. Representative Lueck, do you want to take some time to talk about the transportation bill and maybe some of your challenges with it?
Yeah, the primary challenge was that there's some significant tax increases on license tab fees. We would tie the gas tax to a kind of an automatic renewing thing that would track the cost of construction, and that sounds like a good idea. But if you think about the price of a 2x4 now, it's 3 to 4 times what it was a year ago. Be careful when you just put things in automatic. There's a lot of good things in that bill too, and in fact, I don't believe I voted against the final transportation bill. So I would anticipate when we get it back from the Senate and it gets into conference committee, probably be able to support it. as long as we don't have these significant tax increases. It's just a little too early to be doing that. I'd like to see our economy get move forward a little more stable. But it does have some good things in there, especially for small towns and townships for roads.
Representative Schultz, we're getting into that season. After spring comes road construction season in Minnesota. Do you want to talk about the transportation bill a bit?
You know, we have really underinvested in infrastructure in the state, and so now is a time to invest and to raise revenue. And so for cities or communities that have 5,000 or fewer, there's direct money for their road repair and bridges. We saw videos of bridges that are falling apart. I mean, concrete just falling. So we need to make those investments so people are safe. Also, people in Duluth know how important it is to have good roads because it reduces your repairs on your cars, your struts and your shocks and everything else. So we need to do that investment because to have goods and services travel, you need good roads. And there's what Representative Lueck is talking about is there's money in there to increase the gas tax by the cost of the federal highway construction cost, which is about 1.3% per year. And that results in about $9 per year to the average consumer who drives. So that's a small investment. I think people in Minnesota will support that investment to make sure that they're safe, their loved ones are safe when they cross a bridge.
Great. We got our first question in from a viewer. A caller from Grand Rapids wants to know from the legislators if you're looking into potential voting irregularities from the last election. She heard there was ballot harvesting in the Twin Cities. Either of you know anything about any investigations or any legislation dealing with voters?
I don't serve on the state government elections committee. There was some concerns raised, and there was some things that I personally saw on TV that didn't look appropriate that happened down in Minneapolis, where people were carrying around significant amount of ballots. But I'm not aware of any specific investigations at this point. But I'm not in that particular area of committee service.
Okay. Representative Schultz.
So there was a video circulating. It was found out to be not true, that it was manufactured, fake news. And what they were worried about is people collecting absentee ballots and turning them in. And so we did have a debate on the House floor about putting in guidelines and more structure about collecting absentee ballots. And we're trying to make our voting secure and safe, and there's almost no fraud in voting in Minnesota across the country. So it is not a concern that we have a strong democracy because we allow people to vote, and we need to make it easier to vote, not harder.
Great.
You know, Tony, just it's interesting. People should be aware that has happened, and it has happened in the last few years. And I can point to a situation at the township level where an election was completely overturned because of an individual that was doing exactly, they'd collected a whole bunch of absentee ballots, delivered them personally themselves, and that ultimately they threw the whole election out, and that happened in my county. So be careful about dismissing all voter fraud. That was a very small incident, but it certainly happens, and there certainly is the capacity, I guess, to abuse that system. We just got to make sure that we don't.
Okay. Another major topic in the state of Minnesota right now with the trial of Derek Chauvin and the killing of Dante Wright, there's a lot of discussion around policing legislation. Now I know last year there was legislation that was passed, but there's certainly a conversation, especially from legislators of color and others, about potential this year of going further with policing legislation. Representative Schultz, I'll start with you. Your thoughts and feelings on that?
We need to do something. We did some small reforms last year on no warrior training, no chokeholds, some more accountability on the post board, having civilians serve, and some around mediation. But we need to do more. We need to reduce traffic stops that are pretextual. So, people who are black and get pulled over are more likely to die from a police officer shooting. And we saw that in 2020 across the country. So we need to make it harder to pull people over and infringe on their freedom and their rights. We're talking about a civility council to review and have more police accountability. They have a hard job, police officers do. We need to make their jobs easier. and focus on certain things, but just pulling people over because they have something dangling or their tabs have expired, we need to move away from that model.
Representative Lueck, your thoughts?
Well, I will immediately indicate I've got a son that's been in law enforcement his entire life. In fact, he's actually not that far from retiring because it's mandatory 55 in his line of work. And I agree. We got to continually look at ways we can better do public safety. One of the things I don't think we need to do right now, we're within a week of a verdict on an ongoing trial. We're obviously going to have another one, and so let's not jump in the middle of that before we see how that process works and start making all kinds of changes. That's one of the problems that we see in the legislature is quite often in the interest that we have to do something, we don't always get it right. And make no mistake, we got to continue to look at that. But let's let this process go through with that current trial, take a look and see what we learn. We've got another one, obviously, that's going to come up very shortly. There was charges filed in this last incident. And we just made changes less than 6 months ago. So, sometimes you got to let the car start up and warm up to make sure you got those things fixed and you did them right. I mean, you keep piling these changes upon change, and typically you tend to sometimes undo some things or create new issues that you were unaware of. So let's do it right the first time.
But we just have to acknowledge that there's racial profiling happening in our state, and we need to understand why that's happening and correct that, because you shouldn't have to be afraid for your own life if you're pulled over, and you shouldn't have to be pulled over if you really didn't violate any law, real law.
Great. Still looking for folks. Please call in, please email in. A question I have, and we were talking a bit about this before we went on the air, you are legislating in the time of COVID, a lot on Zoom. The viewers may not know that you're not all gathering in the same rooms, either in committee hearings or not. Sometimes people are doing it from home or not. How is that going for you? And in particular, I'm interested, how are you hearing from constituents, those you represent, in this time where they can't physically visit you, or you might not bump into them in church or in the grocery store as much because of the pandemic? How are you getting input from folks back home on how are you doing and what you should be focused on? Representative Lueck?
Well, one of the things that we do is we have the capacity to set up brief Zoom call-ins with constituents. That works great if they've got good broadband access. Unfortunately, in my district, I think unlike yours, which is quite a bit more compact, poor broadband service is almost the norm in big areas of our district. So a lot of time on the phone, time back in the district. It's a ghost town, our state office building. Very few people on any floor at any given time, and the public is not allowed to come in. So I'm just looking forward till we get back to those normal things. The other thing is that I've not held any open public meetings, simply because, again, we get into that issue of we don't want to set up a circumstance where we get a group of people and have a potential for spreading COVID-19. So it could be better. We just need to get beyond this, because it's really frustrating for everybody involved. Me as a legislator, and also it's got to be frustrating for the public.
Mm-hmm. Your connection with your constituents, how's that going?
I think email is the best right now, but I've been in a lot of Zoom calls with my constituents, and we'll do them jointly with the Duluth delegation. Mm-hmm. So that's been helpful, because then they're not repeating the same thing 3 or 4 times, or we're all there in the same Zoom meeting. Mm-hmm. But from greater Minnesota, I think we've seen more involvement from people able to testify. They don't have to drive back and forth to the Capitol. Mm-hmm. So for that, I think we'll hopefully retain that ability when we do get back face to face, that we can just have people on Zoom connecting to us so they don't have to drive to the Capitol. And it helps people with disabilities who have a hard time coming to the Capitol every day. They can really track what we're doing. So there's been some benefits we're learning from this that hopefully we can improve our process going forward after the pandemic. But we're connecting. We do have, it's a limited time frame because everyone is in Zoom and we have to televise it. So we have, fewer people testifying, and they probably have less time to testify. So it's not been ideal in that regard.
Okay. Well, another big topic in northeastern Minnesota is mining, and we know that the EPA has sent some letters on sulfate standards, and so we've seen some action from the federal government. Haven't heard as much from the state this year. Is there any state legislation or folks discussing any changes to mining, ferrous, non-ferrous, across the board that you're hearing about? Representative Lueck, you sit on the Natural Resources Committee.
Sure do. Yeah, nothing very specific in that area. What the EPA did very recently, though, is they objected to MPCA Minnesota's list of impaired waters, and specifically about a number of lakes between 8 and 12 or 14 and watersheds that may be impacted by sulfate. And that's got a ways to go because what we're waiting for now is for the EPA to send their change to Minnesota's list, and that's going to go out for public comment, and then MPCA will have to make a decision on that. So that's going to play out over the next 6 months. Otherwise, we've seen some things where permits have been suspended while there's court action with Polymet, but that's frankly nothing new. You're probably a veteran of this. You is an IRRB commissioner. This has been going on for 14 years, and that it will continue to go on probably long after the first copper nickel leaves the Iron Range or leaves the range. There'll still be court action kind of trailing this, but I'm confident we're going to be able to get that done. Polymet, probably Twin Metals, and then we've got the Tamarack project, which is actually outside of both the Cuyuna Mesabi and the Vermilion, which would be a really new territory. So,
Representative Schultz, any thoughts on this?
No, we're really taking direction from the federal government and the EPA, and we're seeing what's coming down under Biden's administration for guidance and changes and approvals. So we're waiting for that and for the court cases to get settled. But there's no substitute for clean water. And I serve on the Great Lakes Commission as a commissioner, so it's my job to protect the Great Lakes and the quality of the Great Lakes and to have clean water. So we need to investigate all of the emerging contaminants of concern, including PFAS that we're finding in a lot of water in Minnesota and fish. So we really, and that's cancer causing, so it's vital to protect the health of Minnesotans and to have clean water.
Yeah, great. Got a few more questions from viewers here. The first one is, what is the status of tax bills in the House and Senate, especially the state tax on unemployment income? Will something be done before we have to file our 2020 taxes? Representative Schultz, you serve on the tax committee.
I do serve on the tax committee, and we do have federal compliance for not including unemployment insurance to be taxed, and for Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loans up to $350,000, which most businesses in Minnesota fall under that cap. So they will be exempt as well. So where tax bill, our omnibus bill, is neutral, meaning we're raising some revenue, but we're also having to pay for these tax exemptions. So we're raising on the fifth income by 11%. So those making over $1 million will be impacted. It's like 0.075%. It's a very small percentage of Minnesotans that are impacted of that tax bracket, so we can pay for these tax exemptions. It's a very healthy, solid tax bill. It's progressive, and it raises revenue so we can address housing shortages. So we can invest in public health. There's smoking cessation dollars that are invested because of the tobacco tax settlement. That money has been exhausted. We want to pay for tobacco cessation and prevention. But there's a lot of good things in the tax bill, and I hope we can get bipartisan support when it comes to the floor.
Great. Representative Lueck, your comments on the tax bill, and also in particular, the question was around, do you think that something will be done on this issue before taxes are filed? For viewers who are paying attention, I'm sure everybody is, the tax deadline was just happened, but it was extended a month.
Yeah, so, exactly, to the 17th of May, which is adjournment. I hope so, but I'll be quite frank with you. What Jen just said about being neutral, what people don't understand is that surplus contains about $400 million worth of tax revenue that the federal government has decided not to collect from the federal side that everybody else around us is exempt from having to pay state income tax. State still considers that as fair game revenue when we need to exempt that, which means it won't be a neutral bill. It will be a tax cut by tax speak. Let me say that again, because if we keep it neutral, then we're gonna keep that money. I mean, it's we're doing a little tax speak here. That should be exempted, both the PPP, forgivable loans, and that extra money that came in on the federal for unemployment. It should be just simply exempted like the other states did around us, and not play games with it.
I mean, it is exempted in the tax bill. We just have to pass it off the House floor. So would it be in time by May 17th? That's our last day. Possibly. We could possibly bring that forward. I hope we do. But you know, for the average Minnesotan, it's a tax cut because we're expanding the workers' family tax credit. So a lot of families will see a reduction in their taxes.
Great. A couple more questions here. Greg from Hermantown wrote in, and he's wondering, is the legislature working to support Minnesota's logging timber industry? Lumber prices are skyrocketing right now. Representative Lueck, you're on the Natural Resources Committee?
Yes, in fact, we've got dollars in there to support regeneration of timber, that type of stuff. Now, that's a long-term thing. The price issue on lumber right now has to do with a supply and demand thing, which is really frustrating because at the mill and the wholesaler, they miscalculated on the amount of demand. Turned out that even though we didn't build a whole lot of new houses in the last year, people were laid off. So they were going to do things in their house, so they went, and there was a huge demand. And even at the local lumberyard in Aitkin or Crosby, and I mean, our little towns, they just look at you and go, you don't want to hear this. A piece of plywood is 3 times as expensive. And so, but it's actually, it's an issue with, we just didn't put enough stuff in the supply chain. It's going to take us a while to catch up and drive those prices back down again. It's really frustrating. But we are continuing to absolutely put the money and investment in to regenerate as we harvest every year. In fact, we net increase the amount of timber out there every year based on what we take, which as much as produced every year. We've got more standing trees and timber out there than we had 50, 60 years ago. So, and that's a good thing to continue to make that investment because we're going to be using wood for many, many years.
Great. Representative Schultz, anything
My
to add?
sister's building a house right now in Minnesota, so I am hearing about the cost of construction and the cost of lumber from her. But it is expensive, and it's about supply and demand. So the good thing is that there's a huge demand for housing, and there's people willing to buy it, and you see that with existing housing stock, the prices going up, the median prices, not just in the Twin Cities, but also in Duluth, because if building costs are expensive, they're going to go to existing housing stock. But it's a good problem. We have more people moving into the state, and it's creating this excess demand for housing and construction.
Great. Another question here from a viewer would like to hear the lawmaker's thoughts on reinstalling the Fairness Act, which he said held people to the truth. He says it was abandoned during the Reagan era. Don't know if that's federal or not. Are either of you familiar with the Fairness Act?
No, not as far as anything that happened in the last 8 years that I've been there. Maybe Representative Schultz.
I have no comment on that.
That's all right. I'll be Googling it too after the show goes off the air.
See if we can find out.
Yeah, whoever wrote in, I'll Google it and we'll talk about it next week as well. Last question here, as we're going to be wrapping up somewhat soon, is Representative Schultz, you talked a bit about the federal dollars that are coming in from the American Recovery Act that was passed. This is kind of the second stimulus that was passed during the pandemic from the federal government. And generally, you've kept this aside. You've been doing your budget process as a state, and this is going to be additional dollars. Are you looking to address this during the session? Is this something that the governor is going to take care of once you go home? Do either of you have a sense in how those dollars, it's billions of dollars coming to the state, are going to be looking at being distributed as we move forward? Representative Schultz, why don't you go first?
It's about $2.6 billion coming into the state. That's basically mostly unrestricted around COVID, but also it can be used for infrastructure like broadband, which I hope we invest in, and infrastructure like water, sewers. But the other money coming in, and a lot of it's for childcare, Health and Human Services, we're waiting for federal guidance from the CMS and from the Treasury to tell us how we can spend that money and how long we have to spend the money. So I know there's a lot coming in for home and community-based services, which we need money for that to keep people in their homes longer, out of nursing facilities. It's cheaper for the state. So I hope we have a role in deciding how that's allocated if we get federal guidance in time.
Great. 30 seconds, Representative Lueck.
And one of the things, at least in the Ag Bill and the Environmental Natural Resources Omnibus Bill, you haven't seen those yet, but they'll be coming sooner. We put specific guidance in there that would allow the state to backfill wherever it's legal, or obviously, so literally all the omnibus bills are going to have a provision in there to make sure that where we can spend federal dollars, we do, as opposed to state dollars. And that's, as Representative Schultz said, we don't have all that guidance that we would like to have right now. So we're a little bit flying in the blind on exactly how that money is going to come down yet. So, but at least it's going to be very, very helpful. I'll just put it that way.
Great, and we have 1 month of the legislative session left, and I wish you both luck on doing that. And we are out of time, and I'd like to thank Representative Dale Lueck and Representative Jen Schultz for being here this week. Join me again next Sunday, April 25th, for another edition of Minnesota Legislative Report, when we will welcome 2 more legislators from northern Minnesota to the program. For the team at WDSC, I'm Tony Sertich. Have a great evening.